Hello to everyone. This is Linnell Hartway, and I'm with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And I will do a more expansive introduction in a moment. I just wanted to say hello and let you know. We have plenty of time today and plan to take question and answers and hope that this presentation will be very interactive in that sense. And so please feel free as we're going through the actual slides and the presentation to type in your questions as we go, and we will do our best to get to all of them. So our presentation today and this webinar is on a new publication that has been developed in conjunction with the group that is here today to present to you. And the material is called, we've been calling it a palm card or a booklet, Child Support When You're Afraid of the Other Parent. Stay safe, know your options, get support. And so we will move into introductions of our speakers.
Hi, good morning. My name is Bridget Guerra, and I'm a legal victim advocate in a nonprofit, domestic violence nonprofit agency in Yolo County, super small rural county right below Sacramento County in California. And I look forward to further speaking on what we've done and how excited we are with this palm card for our county.
And it's Michael Hayes with the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, and thrilled to have everybody on the line, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the Office of Child Support Enforcement does and our role in developing this resource after everybody has done introductions.
Hi, this is Rachel Orsinger from the Family Youth Services Bureau in the Administration for Children and Families in the FIPSA office. Welcome to everybody. Thanks so much for joining us with this exciting collaboration.
Hi everyone, my name is Miriam Durrani. I'm the Director of Policy at the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. I'll be telling you a little bit more about what we do in a minute, but we are here for all of your technical assistance needs, and I'll show you how to reach out to us shortly.
Okay, and as I said before, Linnell Hartway with the NCJ-FCJ. I'm the program manager in the Family Violence and Domestic Relations program. I'll be providing some additional information about the council and the council's resource center, which is hosting this webinar, and our work on the palm card booklet.
And we've heard from Bridget. Tara, can you introduce yourself too?
Oh, my apologies. Hi, good morning. My name is Tara Stobanenko, and I work with the Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health Family Spirit Program, but I am also a domestic violence advocate, sexual assault advocate with WEAVE here in Sacramento, California.
Okay, thank you everyone. And so now I think we've got a little brief presentation from each of the agencies and organizations involved in the booklet's development.
So again, Michael Hayes with the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, and our role, we're part of the Administration for Children and Families, and our role is providing technical assistance and regulatory guidance to state and tribal child support agencies across the country. And one of the primary activities that we engage in with those states and tribes is on technical assistance for delivering child support services as part of the public system. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after all the other speakers have, and we'll get a little overview of the scale of the child support program and the scope of that after we've heard from our other presenters.
Hi, this is Rachel Orsinger from the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act office in ACF. We are the federal agency or federal division that oversees the FIPSA Act, which those of you in the DV side of things probably have heard of. It's the main federal funding source for emergency DV shelter and services, and we just celebrated our 35th anniversary of the Act. The Act funds about 1,500 plus shelters through state grants to all of the states and territories, as well as tribes and domestic violence coalitions across the country. And as you see, that's meeting a lot of people throughout the country each year. We also fund national technical assistance providers on a variety of different topics, such as the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges for our Child Custody Resource Center, and also the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, who are on the call today, as well as a number of other providers. And I'll pass it back over to Liddell.
And it looks like from some of the chats that we've got a few people who have issues hearing either from myself or from other speakers. I've got that message to Amber, and we will see what we can do to make sure that you can hear. Oh, I got it. I can hear now, so that Amber must be working on it. As Rachel mentioned, her program funds, among other resource centers, the Resource Center on Domestic Violence, Child Protection, and Custody, which is part of the MCJ-FCJ, Special Interest Resource Center, and we provide training and technical assistance nationally, regionally, to states, tribal, and local levels in areas around the intersection of domestic violence and child protection and custody. And you can see from the screen a couple of our areas of focus: judicial education and resources, tailored assistance for educational programs, and research and individualized consultation.
Hi everyone, this is Miriam again. I'm with the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. So as Rachel mentioned, the magic of FIPSA, we are also a FIPSA-funded resource center. We were established in 1993 to provide comprehensive technical assistance, training, resource development related to domestic violence, intervention and prevention, community education organizing, and public policy and systems advocacy. Our mission is to strengthen and transform efforts to end domestic violence, and we're committed to ensuring that policy, practice, and research is grounded in and guided by the diverse voices of all survivors. So we have some expertise in the intersection of domestic violence and economic security. On the screen, you'll see a few of our teams, a few of our approaches, and a list of our key initiatives and special projects. If you ever have questions about domestic violence, whether it's child support or broader related to economics, housing, if you're looking for information on Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which we're in right now, feel free to reach out to us at our website at nrctv.org, and looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Miriam. So it's Michael Hayes back from the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement. And since the topic of this webinar is getting child support when you're afraid of the other parent, we wanted to give you a little bit of just a snapshot of how the child support program works and the scale of that. And the last count I saw is we had over 350 people on the webinar. Clearly, we have tapped into a need for survivors, and I'm especially excited that we have today both Bridget and Tara, who are domestic violence advocates working in local programs. They were recently in a training that the federal office was doing in California, and they were talking about their work with survivors. And when we get to introducing the Palm card, they're going to be a kind of a sounding board for how they see using that Palm card when they work with survivors. But to the overview of the child support program. So the federal office where I'm housed, we work with state and tribal child support agencies, and the purposes are to establish paternity, which is legal fatherhood, to set child support orders, so the financial orders, to obtain child support payments, to provide access to health care coverage, and to connect parents to support services, which all of those things are relevant to many survivors of domestic violence. We, on our website, because while we have the federal funding that goes to states, the specific activities, the details of how child support is implemented is really a state-driven approach. And so on our website, we will list, you can go to it and find contacts for all of your state and tribal child support agencies. But some things just for domestic violence advocates to know about child support. So child support agencies, the caseloads are big. We have more than 14 million cases nationwide. More than 32 billion was collected, with 96% of that going to families. So some is retained for public assistance cost recoupment, but most of it, 96%, goes to families. There are some public benefit programs that include child support requirements. So TANF, or cash assistance, adult Medicaid, those are requirements when a person receives those services they have to cooperate with child support. And then in some states, SNAP and child care services are also trigger an automatic child support case. And so a couple of factors there for advocates to know about the child support program. A couple other things just to note, and this, I think it's important to share some of this information because it goes into the Palm card, the resource that we're going to talk about. So looking across state lines, there's significant confusion and there's variability in applying good cause standards and family violence indicators. That's very much a state-by-state policy determination. There's some basic requirements from the federal government on states and tribes for good cause and family violence indicators, but there's a lot of variance across how it's implemented specifically in the states. Within the child support program, administration varies. So in some states, the state runs the entire program and all the offices are state employees. In other states, the state has some administrative oversight, but then the actual services are delivered and run out of county offices. Another variance in state-by-state approaches is that in some states, the operation of the child support program and child support orders are very much the purview of the judiciary, and all orders go through a judicial process. In other states, almost all the orders are done administratively by the Administrative Child Support Agency, and we have some states that do kind of a mix. And then one other final factor that advocates need to know about child support is that while the public child support agencies don't have any legal authority to determine custody and visitation, in 35 states, when the child support orders are being calculated, the amount is being calculated, there is some credit that's given for parenting time. And so while they aren't determining the legal custody, they may give credit for the number of overnights a child is in each parent's home when determining the child support amount. And then there are a handful of states that generally include a parenting time or visitation order when they establish child support. So that's just some, the bottom line here is to recognize that there's a lot of variance across state lines. Just, again, a snapshot, 15 million children in the child support program in 2017. It's 1 in 5 children in the U.S. who receive child support services. So it's a very big program. And you can see there how it compares to Medicaid, SNAP, WIC, TANF, and other public services. So the project, this background really grew out of a collaboration between the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, NCJ, FCJ, the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, the FIPSA program, and then also just the demand, the request from DV advocates and child support staff across the country, recognizing that for many victims, there was limited understanding about how child support works and not much in the way of a guide for navigating the child support process. And the reason I emphasized the variability across each state line was that had to be taken into account then when we developed the home card, because our focus was to develop a general information that was really more a question a set of questions to guide information gathering that could be used across the federal, state, and tribal systems. And so I think as we get into it, you'll see how it, there aren't specifics about certain state processes, but there are questions to help both survivors and advocates get the specific information based upon the jurisdiction that they are in. I'm going to turn it over to Linnell to give a little more introduction, and then we can dive into it.
Thank you, Michael. So I was asked to sit in on the discussions regarding the Palm Card and try to help develop a end product that could be both general and useful. And those two things are not always easy to do together. As Michael said, there is great variability across different systems, and even within systems, county to county within states, on what particular process or requirements might be. Everything from what's noted in differences in just laws or focus, and then there's also, of course, state-by-state variability in whether or not orders such as protective orders in domestic violence cases might include any child-related relief. So what we ended up with is trying to provide common questions or common issues that we could highlight and focus on for the Palm Card that would give victims, survivors, and advocates working with them the questions that could start a conversation when that person is going through the process or considering going through the process. And so as you'll see from the first page of the booklet, where we started from was also a split in purpose, which is, are you someone who wants child support but are concerned and have fears about how that may affect a former partner, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend? Or are you someone who already knows they do not want to seek child support because of those concerns? And so we basically have a two-tiered response in the booklet on questions and ways in which those concerns can be brought to the attention of child support agency workers. So letting people know that these questions, if you are afraid, are unsure, or know for sure you do not want child support because of those fears and concerns, that you're not alone, and that lots of parents have questions, are in need of child support, but worry about their safety and the safety of their children. And so the booklet and the card tries to explain the process generally, provide options and questions as you walk through the process. So as I said, one of the tiers of the questions and answers section for the booklet is if you don't want child support and knowing how that process works and what you can do when working with child support agencies. And the first focus is, of course, the good cause exemption from collection. And the violence or fear of violence and safety of victim, parent, and child can provide good cause to allow public benefits to be processed and provided without having to go through the child support process. And as Michael explained to the group many times going through this, is that there's the automatic, if you go through, walk into a public benefits agency and start applying for benefits, there's an automatic presumption that child support will be used and or included in the process if there are children, and the good cause exemption is a way to get around that automatic presumption. So then it starts explain the good cause exemption, walks through that process of how you can get such an exemption when you're working with your caseworker. first question, of course, is whether or not there's that automatic start. Does applying for benefits mean a support case will automatically open? And how, if it is an automatic opening, then, and it already gets opened or has been opened by applying for the benefits, how a case can get closed, or you can stop one from opening in the first place.
And Lynn, I'll just jump in here. One of the things that is important to note, and why we have these open-ended questions, is that for most states, the requirements to receive good cause, they're different. They vary based upon. In most states, it's going to be the TANF state plan that has those specifics, and the requirements for those. And so it's laid out as questions so that you can get the information, solicit the information needed to know what to do next to pursue that good cause exemption. And I see we've had one question already showing up about if the victim of domestic violence applies for child support, and to get that from their abuser, do they have to release their location if they're in a shelter? And so we'll talk, there's some questions in the Palm card about address protections. And so, Latasha, we're going to definitely get to that.
Right, so you can see in this section in the questions, as Michael said, we were trying to solicit questions that would point advocates and victims in a direction. And also, as you can see from the language, we're trying very much to avoid any of the legalese that can go along with these explanations, so that it's a direct, if you are going through this process, what do you need to know? And so the language here is generally the good cause exemption. We're trying to find language that would be something that would be familiar to public benefits workers across agencies and also across jurisdictions. One of the things that, as most of you know, and working in this community and with domestic violence, is that the definition of domestic violence can vary, and people's understanding of what it might mean can vary. So we next, in the booklet, move into trying to provide a basis for understanding of what a victim's concerns might be and whether or not that is domestic violence. If people automatically think of physical or sexual violence, that does not include the full scope of what might be included. And so we're providing more background and information about context or other ways in which abusive behavior can be used to control or harm a victim. Physical violence, threats, shame, insults, isolation, resources, access to money, and controlling a victim's ability to leave or stay. And that includes, of course, for the booklet's purposes, discussion of threats regarding custody and child support as a way to maintain control. And so that leads us from those early questions about good cause exemption, and so providing some kind of basis for those reading it or advocates walking a victim through the process of the ways in which they may have been victimized or have concerns, that they can then use that to try to speak with public agency workers about domestic violence and their fears for their safety.
Linnell, this is Michael. Can you pull your microphone a little closer? A couple of people so they're having a hard time hearing.
Okay. Trying to move it closer now. I'll lean in.
Great.
Following up on concerns about domestic violence and its various forms, and speaking with an agency worker about any exemption for good cause or going through the process. We are then focusing in the booklet about providing information to workers about any protection that may be issued. This, of course, also goes back to Michael's concerns in discussion about the changes and difference between systems, and that can include, of course, differences in what those orders might contain, and so letting victims and advocates know that it's very important to let an agency worker know every time you visit or have a conversation whether or not you got a protection order at that time, and even if you do not have one, that's not the end of the discussion. You can continue to have discussions with agency workers about safety. And so both providing a lead to prompt people to mention any orders they have, but also letting them know that the lack of order does not necessarily mean that the discussion is over, and that any safety concerns should be brought up at any point. And even if prior statements by the victim that there was none, information and circumstances change, and agency workers need to know that.
And Linnell, I'll just, to emphasize that one of the things for child support agencies is for them to do address non-disclosure or address redaction on documents. This is a state-by-state policy. OCSE has provided guidance to states that that while if there is a protective order that absolutely meets the requirement for address non-disclosure, but that our recommendation is that they have other ways of accepting even verbal disclosure and using that as a reason to do address non-disclosure. And so we really want to emphasize that it's not just the protective order that's necessary. The reason we are emphasizing the importance of showing that protective, if a victim does have a protective order, and showing that every time, is there have been some assumptions that, well, I got this protective order from the court, and the child support agency is part of the court, so they must know I have a protective order. And very few state child support agencies have interfaces with the protective order courts. They're oftentimes a different court that's doing that than where the child support agency is doing their child support orders. And so it's not at all common for the child support agency to have any kind of interface with related to protective orders. And so we don't want victims to think, well, they know this information, and that's why they don't share it. So let's go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. And back to Latasha's earlier question, we will have some more, of course, as we go through the actual question and answer, but that's also why the confidentiality is mentioned on this stage of the booklet as well, because regardless of the stage of the process, and regardless of whether or not you have a protection order, bringing up fears and concerns about confidentiality at any stage is important.
Right. And there's a chat that I want to make sure that we don't lose about the link to the Fed comment that the protective order equals automatic address non-disclosure. And I can, Amber, I can send that information to you. I just want to make sure we don't lose that comment, because there is, in the requirements for child support agencies, if the child support agency has a reason to believe that disclosure of an address could lead to the physical or emotional harm of the parent or the child, the agency is required to keep addresses confidential, and the existence of a protective order is automatically meets that requirement for the child support agency. But of course, the child support agency does need to have that, they need to know there's a protective order. So, and so it's important for a survivor not to assume that just because the court has issued it that the child support agency is going to know that. So next in the booklet we get into kind of a set of what's going to happen in the child support process, kind of the steps of the child support process, and then some questions that a survivor or an advocate working with the survivor could ask to help that survivor stay safe. So while there are, as we pointed out, a lot of variability across from states and tribes, different ways things operate, there are some common steps. And so the very first one is that once a case gets open, the child support agency is going to be reaching out to the other parent, right? And it may be through telephone, it may be through mail. In some instances, it will be a deputy or private service process, private process server who goes out and knocks on the other parent's door and says, you've been served, you're being sued for child support. So there's a range of ways, and so the first question is how and when will the other parent be contacted? That's an important part to find out, and then immediately at that case opening, asking about flagging their case for family violence so that none of their contact information is shared, because in some jurisdictions, a parent, the applicant for child support, their contact information might be on the paperwork that is served on the other parent. And so that's one of the very first questions to ask for that kind of at the very beginning of the case process. And then again, some very common steps in the child support process, paternity testing. People may call it DNA testing. We tried, as Linnell pointed out, we tried to, if we were using a legal term or a more of a legalese type term, we tried to do a definition or use plainer language, language that maybe people are more familiar with. So we talk about the paternity testing, child support, and the address. And so asking again, how do I get my case flagged so my address isn't shared? And we also, it's not just shared with the other parent, but also flagged so that it doesn't go into it's flagged and protected in the National Child Support Database and on court documents. And those are kind of three separate issues around address confidentiality that we would want a victim and an advocate to ask. Some offices, in some settings, one of the very first things that child support do is try to set an in-office meeting, and that might include the other parent. And so asking about that, and if that's going to include the other parent, are there options for participating by phone or video conference, scheduling on a different day, or perhaps scheduling for court where there might be more security options in place. Another stage in some states, and again, as I pointed out at the very beginning, some states are totally administrative, so they wouldn't involve the courts. But many states, there is some court involvement. And so for the survivor to ask about if the case is going to go to court, to work out the details of the order or to get the order established, asking some questions about safety options for getting into and out of the court, waiting areas, if there is security at court, and will security be notified about the safety concerns, asking about phone or video conference, and asking about bringing an advocate from a domestic violence program, so that court accompaniment kind of process.
And those differences in the chart and the questions, as Michael mentioned, between the agency and the court, this goes back to that earlier comment about the federal comment and the requirements for what the agency will do and the understanding of what has to be done or additional things have to be done to make sure that the court is aware of what's going on. You should also not assume when walking a victim through the process that just something automatically done by the child support agency is translated into any kind of court order or step if that is part of the state's process.
Great, thank you. And so we did also want to include some questions about child support and visitation. Some places will call it parenting time or custody. And so one of the questions that a survivor would need to ask is, will the child support order include visitation? In most states it will not, but there are, as I pointed out, a handful of states that do address visitation as part of that. Then even much more commonly is this next question about, does the amount of time the children spend with each parent affect how much support must be paid? And so, as I pointed out at the beginning of the webinar, 35 states have in their child support guidelines some formula to account for parenting time and give credit for that. And how that credit is given is often left to whatever information the parents provide to the child support agency. And so this next question about what happens if I don't agree with the other parent on visitation is very important. So if the child support guidelines do include a credit for parenting time, and you've got a victim parent who maybe won't, who may have trouble standing up for themselves against claims by a battering parent that the children are with them a certain amount of time, they need to know kind of what the process is for resolving that and what they would have to do to resolve that disagreement. And then it moves into child support orders and collections. So we've gotten, the first part of the booklet covers kind of getting in the child support order, and then the second part and the next parts of the booklet, what happens next in the child support process. And so asking about how child support will be collected, what are the collection steps the child support agency is going to take. The goal here is so that have these questions so that a survivor isn't surprised by some action that the child support agency takes, right? So typically child support is collected through a wage withholding, so there's going to be a notice that goes out to the non-custodial parent, the parent who doesn't have custody, who's supposed to pay child support to their employer. And then, if that doesn't work and their payments aren't being made, child support agencies will start doing other enforcement actions. And an important question for a survivor to ask is, how will I be notified? Well, first even, will I be notified before collection action is taken? And how will I be notified? And then another thing we wanted to build into the booklet was, as from the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, as we're providing technical assistance to state and tribal child support programs for them to increase both their knowledge of domestic violence, the training that they have on responding to survivors, and also asking questions about domestic violence and safety so that they can help do some safety planning and work with survivors. It's also likely that a survivor might be wondering why that child support worker is asking about domestic violence, because they came to child support not for domestic violence services, they came to child support for child support services. And so we wanted to give a little explanation of why a child support worker would be asking questions about domestic violence. And they want to help keep families safe, be able to explain what things can be done to make getting child support safer. One of the goals of the child support program is financial independence and economic stability for families. And so our goal would be to do that safely so that survivors have that economic independence. And then the other thing is we work with other community agencies to make connections, and that may be transportation, housing, or in this case, working closely with domestic violence service providers, agencies in their area that are working with survivors. And so that's where Bridget and Tara come in, because as domestic violence advocates, they have been working in their local communities in close partnership with their local child support agencies. And just going to go to the last page here, we want to really remind survivors that even if they've already told agency staff that they didn't have a safety concern, we know that situations change and that they can update that information at any time because the child support program wants to help keep them safe. So actually now I would love to hear, Bridget or Tara, you have been helping survivors navigate the child support process out there in California, and kind of talk a little bit about what that experience is like and how you could see using this tool, this resource, in your work with survivors.
Sure, I'll let Tara go first.
Thank you. Hi, Bridget. Okay, so
Hi.
I really like this this tool because I think that it really provides, number one, as domestic violence, and sexual assault advocates, we're not always super informed about every aspect of the legal system, and this provides a jumping off point to start building that knowledge. And we all know that we don't know what we know. We don't know something, right? So you may not have had any experience of a family that is involved with child support or that has mentioned any challenges with child support. But I think that when you do, this will be a great handy resource to help guide you in your learning and then in that support of your families. And in that conversation, thinking about financial abuse. So families that are involved with child support who have had a history of some type of domestic violence really are, their risk for financial abuse is increasing dramatically with the potential involvement in child support. So how can we help families recognize that and identify that, and then support them in navigating the system to reduce any further victimization or just, the anxiety that comes along with not only being somebody who's experienced domestic violence, but now having to deal with this giant system that may seem overwhelming to them. Let's see. So I think Michael said something about best practice. And I'm not sure if that's in regards to me or to Bridget.
That was in regard to another comment. Sorry.
No. Oh, Gina. Okay, cool.
Yeah, to Gina's question. Yeah.
But I just think having this handy for when this situation comes up for you is, the number one way that it will be supportive for advocates.
And it looks like we do have a couple of questions that have gone through on the chat line. And the first one that I saw after Latasha's was a question regarding use of the booklet for undocumented parent survivors. Does anybody have any thoughts on any particular use?
So kind of a general comment from the child support perspective. So to receive child support services, there's no requirement around documentation. So unlike some public services that there may be a citizenship or documentation requirement, there's not that requirement within the child support program. So that's the official, right, open door policy. Now, it is quite common, and prior to working in the federal office, I worked in the state of Texas and child support, and it was at least somewhat common where a batterer might use threats around immigration status and saying, oh, I'm going to report, if we go to court for child support, I'm going to tell the courts that you're undocumented, or I'm going to report you to immigration that you're going to be at court on this day. That the child support agency can't control that kind of threat, right? But the services can be provided to undocumented, and the address non-disclosure as well can all be provided regardless of documentation status.
And we had an earlier question as well about whether or not child support can be ordered in a case where both parents have custody. At some points they're regularly referred to as some type of joint custody. And that goes back to what both Michael and I were talking about in terms of state to state and differences between what each state requires or implements. Most states have some type of guidance at their state or county levels for how they calculate what support will be paid by whom and how much, and it has to do with many different factors. And as Michael pointed out, some states will include credits for any type of joint custody or shared custody or nights in which the child spends in each home. It also involves calculations of things like income and other factors. So we couldn't go into anything that's specific for this resource, but we just sort of hope that the questions facilitate that conversation in any individual agency office or court.
Right. And there's a question that was a follow-up around documentation status, and from Jody, it looks like about what's required for a person to file for support from someone who isn't documented. So yes, the applicant doesn't have to have citizenship or be documented, and similarly, the person who would be asked to pay support or required to pay support, a case can be established whether they're documented or not, and generally it's address information, other identifying information, if they know a place of employment. Those are the kinds of questions that will be asked to be able to open a case, whether they're documented or not. There were other questions we should go back to. Well,
let's see, we had, we had the discussion from Gina about the best practice, if you wanted to, but it looks like that she's offered up answers. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to add to that.
Well, and that is I'm really glad for people who've been following in the chat the conversation from Gina Tharp in Oklahoma. One of the, and this is where for advocates who are, and I'm going to ask Bridget to talk about the work that they do in YOLO, but for advocates working kind of in partnership with their local child support agency to know kind of what the agency's practices are. And so one of the common issues that shows up is a victim who is willing to waive back child support because of the threats that a batterer has made about that back child support. And what should the child support agency do if you have a survivor who is saying, no, I want to forgive this back support? And Gina's guidance there, her suggestion is that for the state not to forgive it, but to reserve that back support so that it's not totally gone, so that if it got, if the victim were to get to a point in the future where it was safe for them to collect that back support, they could ask for the child support agency to start enforcing on that again. But this is where the variations by state, some states would perhaps not be willing to or be able to reserve, kind of put on hold enforcement on that back support. And so having that conversation and knowing what's possible in your state is really critical to be able to give guidance to the survivor. One of the other practices that states have adopted there is the survivor may say, I'm willing to forgive this support, but the state can offer to, because the state is a party to the case, the state can offer to object to that to the court. And that can be a way to take the pressure off of the survivor, and it be the appearance is that the state is the one that is maintaining that support. But as we've worked with states around this practice, it's important that if it's the state's attorney that's doing this or a caseworker that's doing this, that they have talked that through with the survivor and really taken a survivor-centered approach and following their kind of guidance on what is safe for them. But again, Bridget, why don't you talk a little about kind of the interaction that you have there in YOLO? Yeah.
Of course. So hi everyone. So I'm calling from Yolo County. We are a super rural county, and the reason why that's significant is because we actually do, the majority of our clients that we have and survivors that we have are monolingual Spanish speakers. And so we get the issue a lot presented about legal status, and, the survivor would typically ask us, like, well, I'm undocumented, and exactly what Michael had just mentioned previously, that the abuser will say, well, if you seek child support or restraining order or whatever it is, I'm going to report you, just watch, things like that. And so we deal a lot with clients that come in, and that's on top of, whether or not they even qualify for child support because of their status, that they definitely don't even are concerned of moving forward with anything because of the threat of believing that their status will implicate somehow on their ability to seek services, which of course is never the case. So I'm really glad that you touched on that, because that's a huge issue that we have in our little rural county that's known for wine and corn, which I think is the best. But yeah, so and then another thing I wanted to touch on what Michael had said about reserving the child support. So yeah, we get that a lot too, because of course with our domestic violence victims, we'll have a back and forth, we'll have what people that, clients that go back to their abusers and say, hey, I want to forgive that, I want to forgive, and just drop the child support case, as they often say. And it's great that they have this opportunity for us to explain, like, hey, you can reserve it as well. And then just like Michael said, we can also, quote, like, blame it on the system, really, when the survivor is looking for, like, a scapegoat, if you will, so that they aren't feeling as threatened from the abuser, where the abuser would say, well, because you sought child support, you are looking for it. And no, we assure the client, like, no, this is the state. It's not up to you anymore. Don't worry about it. It's not a matter of something where it makes them feel less in danger of, like, oh, the abuser is gonna retaliate against me because I did it. So I love the fact that child support has the ability to do that. It's an amazing practice. So what we do in our small county, we started this, what we call our family law clinic in 2014. It was just a bunch of ideas among private practicing family law attorneys, ourselves, and our local child support representatives, because we saw a huge need for survivors to safely seek child support services. My job in particular, we focus on doing helping survivors with domestic violence restraining orders in family court and accompanying them, doing the whole process. And then, of course, if the abuser is undergoing criminal charges because of the domestic violence, then we'll court accompany our clients there too for victim testimonies and things like that. And so what we saw as victim advocates when we're in court, the family law judge would often ask, okay, well, thank you for doing the restraining orders, but let's talk about custody and child support. And the majority of us advocates had nothing to say. We didn't know what to say about it because, one, it's in our state, it's in a completely different department. Child support has its own department here. But two, we wouldn't have gone that far because there was no collaboration before 2014. So that's how the conversation sparked and all that. And so for our county, we've been going on pretty strong since 2014 with our clinic. It's actually very much overflowing, which is amazing. And what we do, we have individualized appointments for survivors. They just call in and say, hey, I need this family law appointment, and what that means is that they first meet with a family law attorney. This all one day, one set appointment, maybe takes about 2 hours, and yeah, they meet with a private practicing family law attorney who volunteers their time here. They get the consultation. The family law attorney does the paperwork. If the client needs interpreter services, and mostly Spanish, we'll do Spanish, but if they need another language, we always find a way to find an interpreter. So that's never been a problem for us. And then in that same appointment, once their family law documentation is done, typical with like divorce and custody, let's say, then they'll meet with the child support representative in the office literally next door. And we're such a small closed building that we can hear our own, we can hear each other with the consultations and stuff. So the child support representative has a really good idea on what's going on with this person's case and all that good stuff. And then then the client moves on over to the office next door, and the child support representative, depending on where the survivor is at, the representative can give a consultation, open a case right then and there, do follow-ups and things like that. And it's great to have that because our survivors, our clients, have that all in a one-stop shop kind of deal. If for our agency too, if our survivors bring in children, their little ones or anything like that, we also provide daycare. And meanwhile, mom or dad is getting their services here at our family law clinic. And then it's great also because they're already here at our agency. Anything that they need regarding like any other services that sparks through just the natural flow of conversation with us, the advocates, the family law attorney, and the child support representative, we advocates take charge of making sure they get that service fulfilled, such as, for example, we'll have a survivor talking to a child support representative and say, oh yeah, I want to have this and then she mentions, well, it's hard, I'm glad I'm seeking child support now because the little ones really need clothes and blah blah blah, and boom, I'm like, all right, great, you need clothes. After you're done with our appointment, let's head on over to clothes closet, see what you need, get what you got, and all that good stuff. And then, or if she or he is talking about, hey, I've been so stressed about moving forward with this child support, like I have like panic attacks, anxiety, and all that good stuff, then it's, again, sparks an idea like, hey, it sounds like you may need some counseling or therapy. After your appointment, let me walk you over to the therapy department and do an intake for you. So it's great to have, to not just have this like formulaic intake of survivors, like, oh, checkbox, you need therapy, checkbox, you need child support, checkbox, you need divorce. Like, no, for us, our practice, it stems from a natural conversation with the survivors, which for us, what we've seen is that that's definitely solidified a trust relationship for the survivor, between the advocate, the child support representative, and the family law attorney that's assisting them. And for that, that's huge, working in the domestic violence world, because, of course, what we all see is trust is broken very much after someone endures such trauma and abuse through the means of an abuser, of course. So, yeah, and it's great because in the documentation, what I'd like to also touch on what Michael said about confidentiality and where you put the or what address you put. We always put our address if the survivor wants us to keep it confidential. So any documentation that the other side responds to or anything like that, we'll receive the mail and then coordinate with the client to receive it at our agency and all that. But the point is, it gives our survivors a safe space and a confidential space for her to I just used confidential in the same sentence. Great. Confidently move forward with the services that she's seeking. So, yeah, and I think it's great because, like I said, we've been going strong. We have a strong, in our Yolo County, little small county that we are, and maybe it works because we are a small county, but we have a super strong collaboration with Child Support Representative. In fact, they're going to celebrate with me, assuming I pass the bar in November. So they're awesome. They are awesome.
That's great.
And it is great that we have thank you. It is great that we have a strong collaboration with Child Support Representatives because I remember hearing in past conferences at child support events among different counties is that their relationships aren't as strong, or even so that there's like small hurdles that child support representatives have to go through to get in contact with the client that is working at their local domestic violence agency. And I think to myself, well, that I guess our little county is doing great because all our child support representatives have to do is give us a call. I say, and we talk about it because we know that we're all, we're all heading toward the same goal anyway. So that's kind of how our little county works. So we don't, or at least in my opinion, and I'm sure I speak for our agency as well, is that we don't have any obstacles between or any red tape or anything like that between us and our local child support department that would hinder them from, or really at the end of the day, hinder our survivor from moving forward with their case smoothly. So, and I think that's great. Yes?
So Bridget, I'm just going to all the other folks out there that are working in domestic violence programs that don't have that kind of relationship with their local child support office, I'm going to say you in Yolo County and with Empower Yolo have a very unique and much more developed partnership between the Yolo County Child Support Office and your program than I think exists pretty much in any place else in the country. So you are one of those model practices out there. And one of the things that I think that for the DV advocates who are on the call today thinking about, well, how would I even kind of start into getting this kind of partnership going that Bridget's talking about? One way to do that would be to take the Palm card into the child's office and say, can I just ask you these questions, because I'm going to be working, I work with survivors that have these questions, and I need to know the answers so I can give them the accurate information. That could be one of the first ways you even just start building a relationship with your local child support agency.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. the way we started our collaboration with child support was amazing. I remember I was with my boss. We were in court, in family court, and we saw one of the child support representatives that we often, pass by and say hello in court, and she's coming out of child support court, and and then we're like, hey, I know that, we know each other in passing, but this is what we do. I don't know if you're interested, but we'd really like to see how we can collaborate on this and that. And then it was easy as that. And, after a few lunch bar meetings, we got together, and then, we started this clinic. So, yeah, it was for us at least, it was pretty easy. They were very much open to it and very, very excited for the project in 2014 that became and is still standing very strong clinic. So I really think just approaching any child support staff member representative, and I'm confident that they'll be excited to collaborate on this because, like I said, we're all working towards the same goal anyway. So why not?
I'll jump in and say if any of you who are working in the DV advocacy world are having a hard time making contact or getting that foot in the door with your local child support program or your state child support program, please reach out to me at the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement. And Linnell, I can't remember, do we have our contact information that's going to be on this? I'll type my contact information into the chat. So email me if you want. You can email the Federal Office of Child Support, but I would say email me directly. I'm going to put my email address into the chat. So if you have trouble making contact with the local child support office or with your state child support program, let me know, and I'll be happy to make introductions. We can do a little speed dating so you get to know your colleagues in child support.
Oh, perfect. It's the new dating app for child support. Great. I love that. And then, yes, this palm card is amazing because we were all, first off, those are all questions that our survivors ask all the time, like, will child support be included in the visitation? What happens if I don't agree, they don't agree, things like that. And so this palm card is, in my opinion, like amazing because it just fills up all the, I can't think of any other questions that our survivors have asked outside of this. So it's so amazing. And what I was thinking, I was like, well, this palm card would be great not only in our local child support department but also our lobbies and our courthouse and our courthouse. And like I said, I'm sure it's because we're a really small county, so we could be like super intimate and know each other very well. And I have no doubt that our courthouse would have any problem with having this palm card ready and available in our family law facilitator's office, at the self-help center, at the clerk's office, and inside our family courthouse. Court departments, excuse me, and of course our child support department. So, yeah, I'm excited for this palm card. Really, not to be so jerky.
We have a bunch of questions that are coming in. Are there questions? So I've been trying to keep track of the chat, but I know I've probably missed some things. So if we, other folks, other presenters, if you've seen a question, Linnell or Miriam or Rachel, a question that we haven't addressed that we want to go back to, please speak up. And Latricia Taylor, yes, these resources are designed for any state to use. That's at the very beginning, to Linnell's point about they're both general and helpful. We hope that we've hit that sweet spot. It's not entirely, I'm not entirely sure if we have, but I think they are designed in a way that they can be used in any state or with any tribal child support programs. There was a question I noted earlier about specifics to be aware of when a child is a product of rape. So that is one generally for good cause to not have to cooperate with child support. That is one of the factors that the public assistance agency should take into account. Again, that's one of the things that from an advocacy perspective you will want to kind of get the specific requirements for that state to be able to prove that, or to have the documentation for that.
Yeah, my quick response to Patricia on that was that there's likely to be, especially on the birth certificate question, different state requirements and or implementation factors. So again, it goes back to having the tools to ask the questions for victims and their advocates to just know that when you're in the office, okay, we're looking at good cause exemption here, or we think we might want one. Does this qualify? What do we need to do?
And there was another question that was way, way back there, and I can't remember who asked it, but it was specifically a question about paternity establishment at the hospital and protection for survivors there. And that is an area that there has been very little, it's an area that I have a great deal of interest in, but there has been very little done to date. So for advocates on the phone who aren't familiar with this, for unmarried couples, for the father's name to go on the child's birth certificate at the hospital, hospitals generally provide parents an opportunity to complete, and it's called different things in different states, but it's some paperwork that will formalize the unmarried father, biological father, as the legal father. It can be called an acknowledgement of paternity, an affidavit of paternity, a paternity declaration form. So there are varying names for it, but it is a process that's supposed to be voluntary. So the parents the hospital will offer this paperwork to the parents. They can complete it at the hospital, and the unmarried biological father's name goes on the birth certificate. So again, if it's supposed to be voluntary, there clearly can be complicated if the batterer, the biological father and batterer in this instance, is there at the hospital coercing the mother to sign it. There really is very little guidance currently out there for hospitals. Hospitals can't keep somebody from completing that. And the best practice here would be for domestic violence advocates who are working with pregnant women to educate them about the fact that this is going to be offered to them at the hospital to prepare them for it, because for many people, the first time they know about this paperwork is after they've given birth and somebody from medical records at the hospital shows up with a stack of papers, and so it catches them by surprise. So that pre-education before going to the hospital would be kind of, at this point, the best practice that's available.
And it looks like we've got a question from Trish Perlmutter on problem of retaliation and enforcement.
Right.
Or up, that is, Michael. It looks like right before you provided your information.
Right. So I saw that. So into this question about if the victim files a motion to enforce child support, then they may be subject to retaliation. So if the child support is not being paid, then there are some minimum enforcement actions that the child support agency should be taking at 60 days, at 90 days, and I'm a little confused as to why the child support agency is not taking enforcement actions in this particular situation, because the child support agency should be filing for enforcement. Now they may be doing some administrative enforcement actions that generally happen before you get to a court filing. So for instance, they may be suspending driver's license, they're going to be doing credit reporting, they may be doing liens or levies on financial accounts. They can also be doing enforcement by suspending other kinds of licenses, professional, sporting, hunting, fishing type licenses. Those are all things that the child support agency should be doing as part of their enforcement actions. And it also points to the value of having that, building that relationship with the local child support agency, so you can ask that question specifically. Like in this particular instance, there may be other factors that in the general I can't respond to.
And also in terms of any retaliation concerns and relating back to the questions, we talked a little bit about the difference between the child support agency questions and their process for protecting addresses and then the court's process. That several states, and depending on where you're at, there may be different ways this is done, but several states also have their own address protection programs that are separate from any child support process, and it may just be a factor of filing with their Department of Justice or their police services agency, so they have a separate address protection program that allows victims to, in this case, say, file for enforcement of an order and keep an additional level of privacy or safety, because they have, all of that can be done from a secure or confidential address. And then that's protected across the state, and that may be also helpful in that circumstance.
So looks like Chanel and Hannah have asked a question about assistance for survivors to get child support enforced once the non-custodial parent refuses to pay. And so I was mentioning some of the very common administrative enforcement actions that child support agencies take. But this is where I think as advocates, you can help. This goes back to that very first question on the palm card, is like, do I even want to pursue child support, right? Because if the non-custodial parent is the victim will know how likely that non-custodial parent is to stay employed and working and have resources. Child support enforcement can only work when the non-custodial parent, the parent who owes support, has some financial resources. And so if a non-custodial parent is willing to couch surf, live off the good graces of other people, not own a car, not have a driver's license, not have a hunting or fishing license, maybe endure threats of jail or go to jail for non-payment of support, there's not going to be, as they say, you can't get blood from a turnip, right? And so if that's the case, then it may not be worth it. Child support can't make magic happen. But if the parent who owes support, would be the non-custodial parent, is likely to work at some point, is likely to have assets of some kind, then the child support program is generally pretty good about getting that support and getting it to the other parent. So that's an important caveat to the effectiveness of the child support program, is that when the non-custodial parent doesn't have any financial resources and is willing to kind of live off the grid in that sense, then they may not be able to collect child support.
Okay, and just for information, it is a 12:15. We are reserved through 12:30, so we have about 15 more minutes for any questions. And in the meantime, as you'll see, we've got a resource page here generally for each of the presenters here. And following that, we have some DVAM resources at both the Council and the NRCDV. an additional contact information and resources available on the National Resource Center, and information about the RCDV CPC's work, which is the National Council, and the website as well.
So I will try to quickly address a couple of the final questions that I've seen, and this is from Madison about does a pregnant domestic violence survivor have to sign off for the paternity test after delivery, or can she refuse? So it's not a paternity test that's going to be offered at the hospital. It's going to be this voluntary paternity declaration or acknowledgement of paternity, and like I said, it's called different things by different states, but it is a generally it's like a 1 or 2 page document that the biological mother, biological father sign, saying that bio dad is the legal dad, and that makes them the legal father. They are not required to sign it. It's voluntary, but the hospital will give that to both parents, and that's where the risk is, right? Because if the bio dad is a batterer and wants to continue to exert legal control or wants to expand their legal control, then establishing that paternity is one way they can do that. And so that's where the pregnant survivor needs to be aware that this is going to be happening at the hospital, and maybe working with an advocate to think about some ways of avoiding signing it without triggering, right? It's a really, really tough problem, and like I said, there really aren't best practices yet that have been developed. And then to the point about people who work under the table, absolutely, there's that possibility for people working under the table. More and more child support programs are doing things like looking at standards of living that somebody might have. So if a person says, I'm not working, but they're driving a nice car, or they are staying in a nice house, maybe they have Facebook posts that show them doing certain things. Some child support agencies are using that kind of evidence to take somebody to court and file contempt. So Rachel, this is a really good question. Is it possible to alert a hospital not to bring in the birth certificate paperwork if the bio parent alerts them that they don't want the other parent? So that's the hospital, the hospitals can't refuse to do that, right? The hospitals have to provide that paperwork. And it is, this is a great point, and I wish that I had better guidance to share here, and this is an area that I would love to have some, maybe a working group of advocates who are familiar with this experience and help us come up with best practices.
Let's see. We've had a lot of questions in the chat about,
yes.
about getting copies, and both OCSC and the Resource Center will have a version on their website. We just completed the booklet, and so we are in the process of getting printed versions. And you will, if you go to the website, which I will type in here so that you have it, the Resource Center's publications page, you can order a paper copy, and there's a click button for that as well. And so we will be able to get paper copies to you as soon as we do our print run.
And Linnell, I'll just also say that to everybody on the line today, we had another webinar about a week ago that was more focused for child support program staff on safe access to child support for survivors of domestic violence, and we had more people that wanted to get on that call than we had room for. Looking at today's response with the questions and the questions that we're not going to be able to get answered on today's call, I think we will look to scheduling some everything you need to know about child support for survivors kinds of calls in the future, and having some regular calls because these questions we're just not going to be able to get to today, and they're really important questions.
Yes, I just sent both Amber and I both just sent the link to the actual webpage for the on the Resource Center. Michael has got that link for OCSE, and I've already gotten a couple of emails from people wanting copies of the print, and we will be more than happy to do that as soon as we've got the papers printed.
And Trish, we're working on the Spanish language translation. That's a conversation that Lynell and I had right before the webinar. So that's on our list. We recognize the need for that. Tara and Bridget, as advocates who've had some success working with local child support programs, what final words of advice would you give to the DD advocates on the line when it comes to reaching out to build that partnership?
Just do it.
Don't be shy.
Honestly, I know. No. Honestly, I used to think, and again, maybe it's just our county, but I was like, maybe there'll be hurdles to reaching out to our child support or any department really for working together, collaborating. And honestly, we haven't had any issue from the beginning. We literally just approach someone and say, hey, we're interested in doing X, Y, and Z with you guys. Are you interested, or is there someone in your department that may be interested that I can look into? And then that's how we've had our other clinics develop too. So honestly, for us, it was very informal and it was very simple. So I hope that everybody else has a same or similar experience in just reaching out to literally anyone in that department. But that's how we did it.
I would just say, this is Tara, I would just say, I refrain from emailing and phone calls if I can. And I just like to go down there and show my face and just let them know that I'm trying to learn more and share, learn for myself and my clients, and then share any resources that I might have. And that's always been really successful in creating that networking and developing relationships. And even if, right away something doesn't happen from agency to agency, you as an advocate will have a warm handoff or somebody that you can connect with to speak with face-to-face when you have questions.
Let's see if we've got about 6 minutes left. So Michael, I don't know if you wanted any other questions you saw wanted to.
I know there's like 2 hours worth of questions here. So an easy answer to one question: will we receive certificates for attending this webinar? No, we do not plan on putting out any certificates. There was a question about incarceration and child support, and that varies state by state. Generally, states are required to have some opportunity for when a parent is incarcerated to lower the child support amount, but that's a state by state. And we've got requests for other language translations. So this is, we have a long list of next steps on this project to expand its use beyond English speaking only.
Yes, there was a question there about resources for low-income fathers that need assistance with payments. There are some interesting programs going out there, but it does depend state to state about what is available in terms of resources. Mm-hmm. And the OCSE actually has some information on their website about different
Thank you, Lynell. Yeah.
And promising practices that states have done to try to link fathers up with resources.
Yes. We have somebody requesting paper copies of materials. Parents incarcerated. So again, and this is to Heather, you're asking for Michigan. I think that's something you would need to reach out to the Michigan program to get the specifics on how they would handle incarceration. I can't tell you off the top of my head how they do it. So thank you all very much for calling in today, typing in your questions. Please use my email address. If there was a question that you didn't get answered, feel free to send that to me. I will respond individually to questions, and also if you need help contacting your state child support agency, I'm happy to help with that. I want to say a big thank you to Linnell at NCJ-FCJ for putting together the webinar and hosting this. This has been amazing. To Miriam and to Rachel and to Tara and Bridget, thanks so much for being on today. And I know that the child sports program staff that I've been talking to have really appreciated all of the partnership opportunities that they have.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
And
Thanks everyone for joining and all the great questions.
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for the participation, and to all of the speakers for helping to put this together. I appreciate it, and thank you so much. It was very interesting.